Hello and welcome back. Today in module number 7 we are going to talk about object-oriented programming, which is this is what R all about, and we will try to break it down with regard to R. What does it mean to R to be object-oriented? So what is object-oriented? First of all, is that everything you touch, ranging from numbers to characters, string or metrics, is an object by itself in R. So R allowed us to do that and allowed us to, in order for us to sort that out, meaning he allowed us to create classes. And classes basically means functions call that lead different operation for the object for different classes. I know it sounds complicated. I know it sounds, what? That's the whole point. I want your attention in order for you to understand what is a class, how is it applied to the philosophy of object-oriented language, and how do R treat those classes. So R has a generic function. As you already know, one of the assignment for module number 6 is basically generate basic functions. So a class is a description of a thing, how the object of a certain type look like. So the object is, in this case, is an instance of a class. And a generic function is a function that has a lot of dispatch methods to allow us to break it, to measure it, to apply that, to sort that, and so on, in order for us to apply the object to our code. So the method of implementation is basically classes that allowed us to break the object into parts. So what is objects? It's the idea of the R stored data elements. Example, you will see different classes that store different data elements, but you can also use different methods to operate them. So example of a vector of an object is a vector, or a list, or, as we did last time, metrics, or a data frame. So the common attributes of R is a class, it's a method, is a type of, and we will go over that, and this is from the introduction to R language that is posted on Crane. This is a good reference for our discussion today. So there's two types of object. There is the S3 and the S4. And the S3 is the classes and method for beginning. It's called the informal methods. And the S4 is the more advanced, but sometimes people get confused, and we will talk about that and try to make sense out of it. Object names is usually a case sensitive. It consists of letters. It cannot contain space or dashes, and you cannot start a number or just a dot allowing by a number. So this is how we sort that or write it in the code. So testing an object types and mode. My object, and now have a container that is 1.2345, which creates an object. And if I will say IS for my object, he will treat it as a 3S object. And so to get mode, I will say my mode, my object, and he will convert it into my mode. Or to get the class, he will say to you, you could just convert it, my object, into 3S4. So again, this is the terminology that we are talking about with regard to object. So our object is basically, if I had to visualize what it consists of, I should have lines across, but it is a container of data or metrics or whatever you want. So the mode of Z is determined automatically by the type of thing stored in Z, such as numbers, such as characteristics, and it can be in a mix or mode or a list in order for us to sort it. So the class of Z is either set by default, or you can, and that's the beauty of R, you can set yourself the classes that you want that the R will treat your data. So it determines how the functions deal with the Z, which is in this case the Z is our object. So what is a class and what is a method? A class is an abstract definition to a real-world object. A method is a function that performs specific calculation on object of a specific class. And a generic function is used to determine the class of its arguments and select the appropriate methods. And so again, this is where I want you to be very clear what is a class and what is a method and how you're going to treat your object. So more about classes versus methods under S4 is this presentation which I will post together. It is part of the S4 that was designed by the founder of S language. And again, this is a really important, and I will post it. And it was presented in 2004 in Vienna, where one of the first R conference took place. And it's worth a while for you to do that. But what is the PowerPoint basically says? It says that object-oriented programming in R is a class, which is the software abstraction of the real object, and the method is the function that performs the action on the data. So the classes basically reflects on how we think of the object and what information they contain, and the method is define how particular function should behave depending, and again I repeat, depending on the class and its arguments. So an object is an instance of a class, and I want you to remember that, and the method is allowed the computation to be adapted to a particular classes. And so the definition of a structure or the structure of the object is a generic function as a dispatcher for the object itself. Another good article, and I want you to read the article because I think this is where I can tell for myself that gave me an idea of what it is and how it's done. And again, the founder of S language, he's the first language in the developed there are, is John Chambers, is still alive, live and kicking. He is in Stanford, and this is what he wrote about that, and I will share this article with you. So we talked about, I gave you the idea of S3 versus S4 system in R. So let's try to capture that and try to understand what does it mean. So the S language and even the R has two object systems, also known as S3 and S4. The S3 is considered to be the traditional. It started with the S, which is very informal, very interactive in a sense what it actually do. The S4 in comparison is a class and method that are much more formal and much less interactive, which is available through method of the package attached by default since the version of 1.7. So our textbook, and I again repeat, our textbook says the comments of the difference between S3 and S4. The S3 is the older, but it is more simple, more dynamic, less structured version. And the S4 is newer, more structured, but has multiple dispatches. And I will try to make more sense of it. But let's start with the basic. The S3. It is the most common class used. It can be applied to multiple data types, and it can provide the print function and the summary function. Comparison to the S4 that cannot do that. So it can also dispatch of the first arguments. So it allows us easy change of classes that of existing object. And so in a personal note, I like to say that the S3 class has no formal or predefined definition. Basically, it's a list with a class attribute to some class name, and this is how the component of the list become a member variable of the object. Following is example, a simple example of how 3S object of class students can be created. And again, this is example. I have names, and I have age, and I have GPA, and I will call it a class. And this is the student class. So if I will say the name, I will have John, and the age is 21, the GPA is 3.5. So what we have here is the S3 class, which means the attribute function to set the class attributes of the object itself. One of the things that I want you to know is how to create a new object. And so it is a good practice to use a function with the same name as a class, but it's not necessary to create object. This will bring some unfamiliarity in the creation of object and make more look similar. So I will add some checkpoints so you will be able to understand. So using a constructor to create an object, student, and I will say function N, A, and G. And I will give it a condition that if there will be apply, I will say stop GPA must be between 0 and 4, and the value, and I will say attributes class, and this case will be the student's value. So this is how I created basically a new object to my inside an object. So basically in this example, this is what it will create. It will create an error, because one of the things that we have to remember is that we set it up, this function, because the GPA has to be between 0 and 4. And in this case, the GPA is between 5. So in this case, it will point out it cannot be, because we declare as a second object that it has to be 0 to 4. Be careful with that. I warn you ahead of time. You will run into problems. So this is where we are going to start writing functions. So now this method will create and call whatever we print an object which we will call a class of a students. It is possible to make on generic function like print or plot. In this case, print function or plot a function or a use method, and so on. But if we will use method as a function, we can have a single call with the idea of what does it consist of. So in this case, students, I'm going to embed a function that I said already classified or created, the NAG, which I did in this function. I created the function. Now I'm going to apply to it. And I'm going to give it some conditions so it will not give me error messages. So in this case, this is what will be, and this is how I'm going to grade it, again by creating another function and the result of it. So the S3 basically says to us, we can define a class, we can create a class inside a class, we can build a list, we can set a class attributes, we can refer to the number of variables, and we can implement generic F, which means a F class name. And we declare generic use method inside of it to be declared. Example from our textbook. Again, this lecture is based on a textbook. I highly recommend you to look for it. So again, I declare, I gave it a list. The class is embedded into the function. The function is able us to simplify the names and the class, and will do that. We also can do with the S3, can create extended, which means a structure list. An example foo. So example, I can create a class, and by doing that, he will say me what is the class name. In this case, will be employee. So Joe is an employee, and the salary and already been embedded in my container that I listed as a list. Now, everything seems to be simple and very straightforward, but let's make it a little bit more complex and more modern. And this is where the S4 classes come into play. It is safer, but you have to check for errors. So you can dispatch on a multiple arguments, but it does not allow you to easily change the class of an existing object, which might be good. To some, it might be bad. It depends. So if I will compare S3 to S4, by definition, define the class. The set class is the S4 function. To create object, in this case, in S3, I need to build a list, set class attributes in order for me to do that. In S4, because it's new, I can declare new, and this is a new object in S4. I can also have reference number variable. In S3, it's a $sign. In S4, it's an @sign. Implement generic F or declare generic, and this is the methods that you use. So defining S4, let's take an example. Set a class employee. I generate a representation, which is the name character, the salary, and the union. Everything is declared, and by doing that, if I will set it up in a way that I will be able to embed the container called student John, age 21, GPA 3.5, it will be able to display to me how it will do that. Under S4, one of the things that we will see is that the S4 allowed us to declare is it true or false. And in this case, is another element that is a good check. Another function is called setClass, which generate a function, which means, what does it mean? That if we have a student and we have a set class with the students, a slot list with a character, age, what I did here, I generate a class that consists of students that has already a function that I created. So it is a little bit more complex with regard to how I phrase it, but again, the power of it allowed us to do that. It can also use a set method to implement, or a method to show a generic function. So in this case, this is what I did, how I display it, and this is how I apply. Accessing and modifying is also part of the function of S4, and this is how he applied to it and how he does that. Modifying is another aspect. Example, in this case, S at GPA, and he will give me, or S without anything, he will say slot name or slot age or slot GPA. Again, depending on the reassignment that you lay out for the R in order for it to represent. Slot function is also very important in how we set it up, and you can always modifying it under S4, which is very important. So again, this example taken from the book itself. So the object management for S3 and S4, IS is called for all your current object. RM is to remove the object. Save, you can save the object and load it later. A class and a module give you more information of the structure of the object, and exits return true or false depending on the object existence. Again, all those examples are part of our textbook, page 107 to 130. So we talked about S3 and S4. We test to confirm the object is correct created. We talked about integrated the given data. We talked about creating a function on a given set, and we call for manipulation of the data from S3 and S4. So assignment, you're going to looking for comparing the creation and method of S3 and S4 object. So you can create both S3 and S4 object. You can test the object by OT type in the PR package, depends if you are using it, and display the object. It also called for a variable within the S3 and S4 object using the $sign and the at sign, and this is one of the things. So I will give you an example. Again, this is from a package. I install the package. This is the line of installation. You can do the installation in, you can do the installation packages install and type the name of it, and he will install it automatically. So everything by itself, you can do it by run code or by installing, depending how you like to do that. So the create method example in this under this package is the idea of it. And so again, I gave you the outline. Baba, and I gave it create an object Baba, and he will create Baba, and I will create a variable inside the object in that it has a baskets, and then in this case I will display the object type, and in this case he will display to me what it consists of, and I hope that you will install the package and test it for yourself. One of the things that you like to do is to see, again, we talked about inside the object and what we can do inside, and in this case eat breakfast is true, and my favorite is fried eggs, and so again it can check to see if your object basically display this, if your object display this information. To create an SR method of object and test it, again, this is something of a code to verify the check the value of a given object creation. And in this case, when we are creating S4 object, let's do an example. And again, taken from our textbook. I define the X, I display the X, I added more elements to it in order for me to verify it, in order for me to test and to see the end result. Example drawn from, this is where I took it, this is where the second address is from one of the founders of the ggplot2, so he lay out for you the difference between S3 and S4. I highly recommend that you go over it to see what is entailed. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed. I think it is important that you will understand the difference between S3 and S4, and please read all the reference that I provide you in order for you to have a stronger sense what does it entail. And until next time, have fun.